They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but what if the sabotage was so meticulously planned, so utterly devastating, that you didn't even know who to get revenge on? I was forced to become a silent detective in my own life, meticulously piecing together fragments of a betrayal that nearly destroyed me. The deeper I went, the more terrifying the truth became, revealing an intricate scheme that will leave you absolutely stunned. But the person who orchestrated my downfall? She sat across from me at family dinners. She smiled at me every Sunday. She called me sis. If you've ever been the person everyone underestimated, the one they thought would never amount to anything while the golden child got all the glory, stay with me. Because what I uncovered didn't just expose her. It exposed an entire system built to destroy people like us. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I never wanted to be in competition with my stepsister. When my mom married Robert Shin when I was 12, I actually thought I was getting the family I'd always dreamed of. My biological father had left when I was 6, and it was just me and Mom struggling in a 2-bedroom apartment in Ohio. Robert seemed kind, stable. He had a daughter, Michelle, who was 14, confident, poised, everything I wasn't. I remember the first family dinner. Michelle sat at the table in her private school uniform, talking about her debate tournament win, her straight A's, her college prep classes. I sat there in my thrift store jeans, still trying to figure out how to fit into this new blended family. Robert beamed at Michelle like she hung the moon. Mom kept squeezing my hand under the table, trying to reassure me. But I could feel it already, the invisible hierarchy being established. Sarah's doing well too, Mom said softly. She got a B+ on her history project. That's nice, Robert said, barely looking at me before turning back to Michelle. Now, about that scholarship interview. It became the pattern of our lives. Michelle excelled at everything. Honor roll, varsity volleyball, student body president. I worked twice as hard for half the recognition. When I made the basketball team, it was good for you. When Michelle got MVP in volleyball, we celebrated with a family dinner at the nicest restaurant in town. When I got accepted to community college, Robert said, "Well, at least you're going somewhere." When Michelle got into Georgetown, he cried tears of joy and bought her a new car. I learned early that love in our house was conditional. It was earned through achievement. And somehow, no matter what I achieved, it was never quite enough. So I found my own path. At 19, while Michelle was thriving at Georgetown studying international relations, I enlisted in the Army. I needed structure, purpose, a place where merit actually mattered, where your last name and your connections didn't determine your worth. Basic training nearly broke me, but I didn't quit. I earned my place. I proved myself. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. 8 years in the military changed me. I deployed twice, once to Iraq, once to Afghanistan. I became a logistics specialist, earned my sergeant stripes, and discovered I was actually good at something. Really good. I could coordinate complex supply chains under pressure, manage teams, solve problems that others couldn't. I wasn't the overlooked stepsister anymore. I was Sergeant Mitchell, and I'd earned every bit of respect I got. When I came back stateside, I was assigned to Fort Bragg in North Carolina. I was 27, confident, capable. I'd been recommended for officer candidate school. My career was finally taking off. Michelle, meanwhile, had graduated Georgetown and immediately landed a cushy position at a defense contractor in D.C., thanks to Robert's connections in the industry. She worked in strategic communications, which seemed to mean attending conferences and writing reports. We'd grown apart over the years. Family gatherings were awkward, surface level. She'd ask about my deployments with this detached curiosity, like I was describing a documentary she'd half-watched. I'd ask about her job, and she'd give vague answers about consulting and stakeholder engagement. But when I told the family I'd been accepted to OCS and was on track to become an officer, something shifted. I saw it in her eyes at that dinner, a flicker of something I couldn't quite name. "That's amazing, Sarah," she said, smiling. "I'm so proud of you." But her smile didn't reach her eyes. 2 months later, I started my officer training. It was brutal, mentally, physically, emotionally. But I thrived. My evaluations were excellent. My instructors saw leadership potential. For the first time, I could see a real future unfolding. Major. Maybe even lieutenant colonel someday. I was 3 months away from commissioning as a second lieutenant when everything started to fall apart. It started small. A negative performance review that seemed to come out of nowhere. My training officer, Captain Rodriguez, called me into his office with a concerned expression. "Mitchell, I need to talk to you about some concerns that have been raised." I sat down, confused. "Concerns, sir?" "Your attitude, your reliability. There have been reports that you've been struggling with the material, that you've been resistant to feedback, and that other candidates have expressed concerns about your leadership style." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "Sir, I don't understand. My test scores are in the top 10%. I've never missed a deadline or failed an exercise." He slid a folder across the desk. "These are incident reports filed over the past month. Anonymous complaints from fellow candidates. They paint a concerning picture." I read through them, my hands shaking. Candidate Mitchell displayed aggressive behavior during group exercises. Candidate Mitchell refused to accept constructive criticism from peers. Candidate Mitchell's negative attitude is affecting unit morale. None of it was true. Not a single word. "Sir, this isn't accurate. I don't know who filed these, but the reports are credible, Mitchell. And they're not the only concerns. Your last psychological evaluation flags some stress indicators that suggest you might not be ready for officer responsibilities." My psych eval was fine. I passed with no issues. "That's not what the file shows." He pulled out another document. There, in black and white, was a psychological assessment with my name on it, marked with red flags I'd never seen before. Anxiety indicators. Stress markers. A note suggesting I might benefit from additional support before assuming leadership positions. I'd never seen this version of the report. This wasn't what I'd been told after my evaluation. There must be some mistake. "Mitchell, I'm not saying you're being dropped from the program, but we're putting you on probationary status. You'll need to demonstrate significant improvement over the next 4 weeks, or we'll have to recommend you for recycling or discharge from OCS." I walked out of that office in a daze. Probationary status. 4 weeks to save my career. And I had no idea what I'd done wrong. The next few weeks were a living nightmare. I worked harder than I'd ever worked. I documented everything. Every interaction, every exercise, every piece of feedback. I needed to prove that these complaints weren't real, that something was wrong. But the complaints kept coming. Another anonymous report. I'd been late to a formation. I hadn't. Another. I'd failed to complete a required reading. I'd turned it in early. Another. I'd made inappropriate comments to a fellow candidate. I'd barely spoken to anyone, terrified of giving them more ammunition. My confidence evaporated. I started second-guessing everything. Had I actually done these things? Was I losing my mind? The self-doubt crept in like poison. If you've ever felt gaslit in your own life, like reality itself was being rewritten around you, hit that like button. Because what came next got so much worse. My friends at Fort Bragg noticed the change. My old team sergeant, Marcus Thompson, called me one night after I'd missed a group dinner. "Mitchell, what's going on? You sound like hell." I broke down and told him everything. There was a long silence on the line. Then, "Sarah, that doesn't sound right. That sounds like someone's building a case against you." "But who would do that? Why?" "I don't know. But you need to start treating this like an investigation. Document everything. Record conversations if you can. Find out who's filing these complaints." That conversation changed everything. Marcus was right. This wasn't random. The complaints were too consistent, too strategic, too perfectly timed to derail my career at the most critical moment. Someone was sabotaging me, and I was going to find out who. I became a detective in my own life. I started keeping a detailed log, every interaction, every formation, every training exercise. I noted who was present, what was said, what time everything happened. I kept copies of every assignment, every email, every piece of documentation. I requested copies of all the anonymous complaints through official channels. They were heavily redacted, but I could see patterns in the language, the phrasing, the specific details mentioned. The complaints showed intimate knowledge of my schedule. They referenced private conversations I'd had with instructors. They knew details about my training performance that weren't publicly available. This wasn't just someone who disliked me. This was someone with access to my records. someone with connections inside the program. I started paying attention to who was around when certain information leaked. I noticed which instructors seemed to have already formed negative opinions of me before I'd even spoken to them. I tracked the timeline of when complaints were filed versus when I'd had family phone calls. And then I found the first real clue. I was in the administrative office filing paperwork when I overheard two staff sergeants talking in the hallway. That Mitchell case, someone from DoD Contractor Relations has been asking about her. Why would a contractor care about an OCS candidate? No idea. Apparently, they have some connection to her family. Wanted to make sure the evaluation process was thorough. My blood ran cold. DoD contractor. Family connection. Michelle worked for a defense contractor. Michelle, who'd seemed so strangely interested in my OCS timeline. Michelle, who'd asked detailed questions about my training schedule during our last family call. No, it couldn't be. But once the thought entered my mind, I couldn't shake it. I started digging into Michelle's company, Titan Strategic Solutions. They had major contracts with the Department of Defense. They did consulting work for military training programs. They had relationships with Fort Bragg, with OCS leadership, with evaluation committees. Michelle wasn't just some junior communications analyst. According to LinkedIn, she'd been promoted twice in the past year. She was now a senior strategic consultant with security clearance and direct access to military personnel evaluation systems. My hands shook as I scrolled through her professional profile. She had the access. She had the motive. I was finally achieving something on my own, something that might actually outshine her for once. And she had the means. But I needed proof. I couldn't just accuse my stepsister of sabotaging my military career without evidence. I'd sound paranoid, crazy, exactly like the psychological profile she'd apparently helped fabricate. So I set a trap. I called Michelle. Casual, friendly. I told her I was struggling in OCS, that I was thinking about quitting, that maybe this wasn't the right path for me after all. "Oh, Sarah," she said, her voice dripping with concern. "I'm so sorry, but maybe it's for the best. The military life is so demanding. Maybe you'd be happier doing something else." "Yeah," I said, making my voice small and defeated. "You're probably right. I don't think I'm cut out for this. You gave it your best shot. That's what matters." After we hung up, I waited. If she'd been behind the sabotage, she'd think she'd won. She'd think I was giving up. And maybe, just maybe, she'd get sloppy. 3 days later, the complaint stopped. No new incident reports. No new allegations. Nothing. That was the confirmation I needed. But I needed more than a hunch. I needed evidence that would stand up to scrutiny. Evidence that would prove what she'd done. That's when I called in a favor from an old Army buddy who now worked in cybersecurity. His name was Derek Chun, no relation to Robert, just a cruel coincidence. He'd been in my unit in Afghanistan, and he owed me one after I'd covered for him during a supply audit that could have ended his career. "You want me to do what?" he asked when I explained what I needed. "I need to know if someone's been accessing my personnel files. Specifically, I need to know if anyone from Titan Strategic Solutions has been pulling my records." "Sarah, that's potentially illegal for me to look into." "Derek, someone is destroying my career. If I'm wrong, I'll drop it. But if I'm right, I need proof." He was quiet for a long moment. "Give me a week." 6 days later, he called me back. His voice was grim. "Sarah, you need to sit down for this. Just tell me. Your personnel file has been accessed 17 times in the past 4 months from an external IP address. The access points trace back to Titan Strategic Solutions. Specifically, to a user account registered to Michelle Chun." My vision blurred. "What else?" "She's been pulling your psychological evaluations, your training assessments, your peer reviews. She's been accessing files she had no authorization to view. But here's where it gets worse. She's also been uploading modified versions, creating duplicate files with altered content. The fake psych eval." "Exactly. The original version of your psychological assessment is still in the system. It shows you passed with flying colors. But she created a duplicate file with red flags and somehow got it prioritized in the review process. Same with several of your training assessments. She's been systematically creating a false paper trail." "Can you prove it?" "I have timestamps, IP addresses, user logs. The The digital footprint is clear. But Sarah, if I turn this over officially, I could lose my job for accessing this information without authorization. Then give it to me. Let me handle it. Are you sure? This could get messy. Derek, she tried to destroy my career. My entire future. I'm sure. He sent me everything. Encrypted files, detailed logs, IP addresses, timestamps. A complete record of Michelle's digital sabotage. But I still needed to understand the why. And I needed to know if anyone else was involved. I did something risky. I drove to DC unannounced and showed up at Michelle's apartment. She opened the door in yoga pants and a Georgetown sweatshirt, her face registering genuine surprise. Sarah, what are you doing here? Can I come in? I need to talk to you about something. She hesitated, then stepped aside. Of course. Is everything okay? Her apartment was immaculate. Sleek furniture, expensive art on the walls, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Potomac. This was what success looked like in her world. We sat on her designer couch, and I decided to play it vulnerable one more time. I'm probably getting dropped from OCS, I said, letting my voice crack. I don't understand what I did wrong, but apparently I'm not cut out for it. Oh, Sarah. She put her hand on my knee, her face a mask of sisterly concern. That must be so hard. I keep thinking, maybe someone sabotaged me? Is that crazy? A flicker crossed her face. So brief I almost missed it. Fear. Why would someone do that? She asked carefully. I don't know. Jealousy? Competition? Someone who didn't want to see me succeed. That seems paranoid, Sarah. Maybe you're just stressed. Maybe. I watched her closely. Hey, random question. You work with military training programs, right? At Titan. Sometimes. Why? Have you ever had access to OCS candidate files? Her expression froze. That's confidential information, Sarah. I couldn't discuss that even if I did. Right. Of course. I stood up. Thanks for listening. I should go. Sarah, wait. It's fine. I just needed to hear a friendly voice. As I walked to the door, I turned back. Hey, Michelle. Yeah. If someone was sabotaging me, and I found proof, what do you think I should do? The color drained from her face. What are you talking about? Nothing. Just a hypothetical. See you at Thanksgiving. I left her standing in her doorway, panic written all over her face. The trap was set. Over the next 2 weeks, I pieced together the full scope of Michelle's scheme. It wasn't just about sabotaging my OCS training. It was bigger than that. Using Derek's logs and my own investigation, I discovered that Michelle had been systematically accessing and manipulating files for 3 other OCS candidates over the past year. All of them had something in common. They were all on track for high-level officer positions in competitive specialties. And all of them had eventually been dropped from the program or recycled due to performance concerns. Michelle wasn't just sabotaging me. She was running a pattern of sabotage, using her access to military systems to derail promising officers. But why? The answer came from an unlikely source, one of Michelle's former co-workers at Titan who'd been recently fired and was bitter enough to talk. I tracked her down through LinkedIn, and we met at a coffee shop in Arlington. Her name was Jennifer, and she looked exhausted. Michelle Chun, she said when I mentioned the name. Yeah, I know her. Brilliant, ambitious, and absolutely ruthless. Why do you say that? She's part of this program. Not official, but it exists. Certain defense contractors have consultants who monitor military officer candidates. They identify the ones who show high potential, particularly in specialties that might later investigate or regulate defense contracting. My stomach dropped. They sabotage them? Not directly. They just make sure certain concerns get raised at critical moments. Red flags and evaluations. Anonymous complaints. Nothing provable, nothing illegal, technically. But it's enough to derail careers or push promising officers into different specialties where they'll be less of a threat to contractor interests. That's insane. That's the military-industrial complex, honey. Michelle specialized in it. She had quotas, targets she needed to influence per quarter. She got bonuses for successful redirections. Did she talk about specific targets? Jennifer pulled out her phone and showed me a screenshot of an internal Titan email thread from 8 months ago. There, in black and white, was my name on a list titled Priority Influence Targets Q3. My name. With a note. Personal connection. High probability of success. I felt sick. She bragged about you, Jennifer continued. Said you were going to be the easiest target because she knew exactly which buttons to push. She knew your insecurities, your history, your vulnerabilities. She'd been planning this since you got accepted to OCS. Why did you keep this email? Because I knew it was wrong. I didn't know what to do with it, but I kept it anyway. When they fired me last month for performance issues, which were fabricated, by the way, I realized this company is toxic. If you're going after Michelle, I'll help however I can. She sent me the email thread, along with several other internal documents showing Titan's influence program. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss what happened next, because the revenge I planned was about to expose more than just Michelle. I now had everything I needed: digital evidence of file tampering, testimony from a former insider, emails proving a systematic sabotage program, and a list of other victims. But I didn't want to just clear my name. I wanted justice. Real justice. For me and for everyone else she destroyed. I spent the next 3 weeks building an airtight case. I contacted the 3 other OCS candidates whose files Michelle had tampered with. 2 of them had left the military entirely, broken and disillusioned. One was now working at a warehouse in Ohio, convinced he'd failed on his own merit. When I told him what really happened, he cried on the phone. I thought I just wasn't good enough, he said. I thought I'd failed. You didn't fail. You were sabotaged. All 3 agreed to provide statements and evidence. I compiled everything into a comprehensive report. Derek's digital forensic evidence, Jennifer's insider testimony, the falsified documents, the pattern of sabotage, the emails showing the influence program, statements from the other victims. But I knew I couldn't just submit this through normal military channels. Michelle had connections. Titan had influence. This needed to be bigger. Public. Undeniable. I needed to make this a scandal they couldn't contain. So I made 3 strategic moves. First, I contacted a journalist at ProPublica who specialized in defense contractor corruption. I sent him everything anonymously with a detailed breakdown of the story. He was skeptical at first, but once he started verifying the evidence, he was all in. Second, I filed formal complaints with the Department of Defense Inspector General, the Army Criminal Investigation Division, and the Office of Personnel Management. Simultaneous reports to multiple oversight bodies, making it impossible to quietly bury. Third, I prepared a presentation for my OCS leadership, not a complaint but a briefing. Professional, detailed, devastating. But before I executed this plan, I needed to do one more thing. I needed to confront Michelle face to face, with witnesses present. I needed her to confess. Thanksgiving 2023. Our family gathering was at Robert and Mom's house in Ohio. I told everyone I had an important announcement to make after dinner. Mom thought I was going to tell them I'd quit OCS. Robert probably assumed the same. Michelle showed up looking confident and relaxed, probably thinking her scheme had succeeded. We were all gathered in the living room. Mom, Robert, Michelle, Robert's brother and his wife, and a few cousins. About 12 people total. I'd also invited 2 guests of my own who waited in a car outside, Derek and Jennifer. Plus, I'd asked my old team sergeant Marcus Thompson to join us via video call on my laptop, which I'd set up on the coffee table. Sarah, honey, what's this announcement? Mom asked nervously. I want to talk about my OCS experience, I said, standing in the center of the room. But first, I need to ask Michelle something. Michelle's smile faltered. Okay. You work for Titan Strategic Solutions, right? In strategic consulting. Yes, you know that. And part of your job involves reviewing military personnel files. Sometimes, for contract evaluation purposes. Have you ever accessed my personnel files? The room went completely silent. Michelle's face hardened. Sarah, that's inappropriate to discuss at a family gathering. Is it? Because I've spent the last month investigating why my OCS training suddenly fell apart, why fake psychological evaluations appeared in my file, why anonymous complaints kept getting filed against me at precisely the worst moments. I don't know what you're talking about. Really? I opened my laptop and turned it so everyone could see Marcus on the video call. Everyone, this is Marcus Thompson, my former team sergeant. Marcus, can you tell everyone what you helped me discover? Marcus's voice came through clearly. Sarah's personnel files were accessed 17 times over 4 months from Titan Strategic Solutions, specifically from Michelle Chen's user account. Modified documents were uploaded to create a false performance record. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. That's ridiculous, Michelle said, her voice rising. This is some kind of conspiracy theory. I have the logs, I said calmly. IP addresses, timestamps, user credentials. I also have testimony from your former colleague at Titan about your influence program. I pulled out my phone and started reading from Jennifer's email. Personal connection, high probability of success. Michelle's face went white. You sabotaged your own sister? Mom's voice was barely a whisper. Stepsister, Michelle snapped, and there it was, the venom finally showing through. And she wasn't supposed to be there in the first place. OCS. Sarah was a logistics sergeant. She had no business trying to become an officer. Why? I asked. Why did you do this? Because you've been riding on sympathy your entire life, she exploded. Poor Sarah, whose daddy left. Poor Sarah, who had to work so hard. Meanwhile, I actually earned everything I got, and you were about to leapfrog over me in the one area I've built my career around. You think I was going to let you become some military officer with authority over defense contracts? You think I was going to let you potentially audit my work someday? The confession hung in the air, recorded by the phone I'd positioned on the bookshelf. It was never about family, I said quietly. It was about control. About making sure I stayed beneath you. You were always beneath me, Sarah. I just made sure you stayed there. Robert looked horrified. Michelle, what have you done? What I had to do, she shouted. Do you know how hard I've worked? How many hours I've put in? And she just gets to waltz into the military, play hero, and everyone's supposed to applaud her? She was going to ruin everything. Ruin what? I asked. Your scheme to sabotage military officers, your illegal access to classified files, your systematic destruction of people's careers. It's not illegal. It's strategic influence. It's how the industry works. Actually, I said, it's multiple felonies. Unauthorized access to government systems, document fraud, conspiracy to obstruct military operations. The DoD Inspector General is very interested in your strategic influence. Michelle's eyes went wide. You didn't. I did. I filed formal complaints with the IG, with CID, and with OPM. As of this morning, your security clearance is suspended pending investigation. And there's a journalist from ProPublica who's about to publish a story about Titan's sabotage program. Your name is prominently featured. She lunged at me. Marcus, watching via video, shouted, Sarah, watch out, but I'd expected this. I stepped aside, and Michelle stumbled into the coffee table. Robert grabbed her arm. Get off me, she screamed. You all believe her? She's lying. She's always been jealous of me. I have proof, I said. Multiple sources, digital forensics, testimony, your own emails. You destroyed 3 other military careers before mine, and you would have kept going. Mom was crying. Robert looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. I need everyone here to understand something, I said, looking around the room. This wasn't sibling rivalry. This wasn't competition. This was calculated, systematic destruction of my career because she saw me as a threat. And she used our family connection to do it because she knew I'd never suspect my own sister. Stepsister, Michelle hissed again. Yeah, I said. I guess that was always the point, wasn't it? The fallout was swift and devastating for Michelle. Within a week, the ProPublica story broke. Defense contractor accused of systematically sabotaging military officers. It named Titan Strategic Solutions and detailed Michelle's role in the influence program. Within 2 weeks, federal investigators raided Titan's offices. Michelle's security clearance was officially revoked. She was placed on administrative leave. Within a month, she was fired. Titan was under congressional investigation, and they needed scapegoats. Michelle was the most visible one. My OCS records were corrected. The false evaluations were purged. The anonymous complaints were removed. I was taken off probationary status and reinstated with full standing. The 3 other candidates Michelle had sabotaged were also given the opportunity to have their cases reviewed. 2 of them chose to return to military service with restored records. One decided he'd moved on but appreciated the vindication. I commissioned as a second lieutenant 4 months later than originally planned, but I commissioned. My mom was there. Robert was there, broken, apologetic, trying to understand how he'd raised someone capable of this. Michelle was not there. She was facing federal charges. The last time I saw Michelle was at a pretrial hearing 6 months later. She'd lost weight. Her designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple suit. Her confidence was shattered. She looked at me across the courtroom, and I saw something I'd never seen before: recognition. Not just of what she'd done, but of who I actually was. She'd spent so long seeing me as beneath her, as someone to control and diminish, that she'd never considered I might be stronger than her. She pleaded guilty to unauthorized computer access and fraud charges. Part of her plea deal included cooperation in the larger investigation of Titan's influence program. She received 2 years in federal prison and permanent loss of her security clearance, effectively ending her career in defense, contracting forever. Today, I'm a first lieutenant serving at Fort Carson in Colorado. I work in logistics and operations, the same specialty I started in, but now with the authority and responsibility I earned. I still talk to my mom regularly. Our relationship actually grew stronger through all of this. She apologized for the years she didn't see the favoritism, the years she didn't protect me from it. Robert and I exchange emails occasionally. He's in therapy, trying to understand how he enabled Michelle's sense of entitlement. I don't know if we'll ever be close, but there's a tentative respect there now. And Michelle, I heard she got out of prison last month. She's living in Florida somewhere, working retail, rebuilding a life from nothing. Some people might say I should feel bad about what happened to her, that I destroyed her life the way she tried to destroy mine. But here's the thing about revenge. Sometimes it's not about destroying someone else. It's about refusing to be destroyed yourself. It's about demanding that the truth be told, that justice be served, that people face consequences for their actions. Michelle didn't lose everything because of what I did to her. She lost everything because of what she did to herself, and to everyone else she stepped on trying to stay on top. I was just the one who refused to stay down. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But the truth? The sweetest revenge isn't destruction. It's rising from the ashes of someone else's sabotage and proving that you were always exactly as strong as they feared you were. That's what really costs them everything. Not your anger, but your resilience. And that's a debt they can never repay. If you've ever been underestimated, sabotaged, or told you weren't good enough, remember this story. Your worth isn't determined by the people trying to hold you down. It's proven by getting back up. What would you have done in my situation? Let me know in the comments.